We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
In the world of geopolitics, there are no accidents, only the execution of interests. As of January 2026, the world is witnessing the Donroe Doctrine in action. While the liberal international order might talk about sovereignty, Donald Trump is enforcing a 19th century reality. The Americas belong to the United States. For 20 years, Venezuela attempted an experiment in anti-American socialism, protected by Chinese capital, Cuban intelligence, Russian deterrence, and the illusion of a liberal international order. That experiment has now reached its violent conclusion. But why now? Why Venezuela? Today, we are breaking down the Tillerson Vendetta, the $100 billion Chinese debt trap, and why this chaos might be a golden ticket for Indian oil giants like Naira, Reliance, and ONGC. To understand the Venezuelan crisis of 2026, we must return to the humiliation of April 30, 2019, the day American power blinked. Back then, the US-backed Juan Guaido, opposition leader who was then the president of National Assembly, as Venezuela's legitimate president. The plan was elegant on papers. Sanctions would suffocate their economy. Diplomatic recognition would isolate Maduro, and the Venezuelan military, sensing the inevitable, would flip. None of that happened. Washington did not just underestimate Nicolas Maduro, Hugo Chavez's chosen socialist successor. It misread how power functioned in Venezuela. Maduro survived not on public support, but on an intelligence architecture constructed since Chavez's era, perfected through the Cuban shield. Since the days of Hugo Chavez, Cuba had provided Caracas with an elite intelligence unit known as G2. Roughly 15,000 to 20,000 Cuban operatives were embedded in the Venezuelan military. They did not just train soldiers, they spied on them. Any general thinking of defecting was arrested before he could even pick up the call. The lesson for Washington was brutal but clear. If regimes cannot be flipped from within, they must dismantle from above. 2026 is the kinetic connection to this humiliation of 2019. We often hear the term narco state, but what does it actually mean? In Venezuela, the government and the drug cartels are not just the partners. They are the same people. The Cartel de los Soles, Cartel of the Suns, is not a gang in a favela, but refers to the sun's insignias on the shoulders of Venezuelan generals. According to the US Southern Command and United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, roughly 200 to 250 metric tons of cocaine flowed through Venezuela annually. About 24% of all Indian cocaine produced in Colombia passed through Venezuela before reaching the US and Europe. But the true rot actually lies in the Preneto system in Venezuela, which allowed criminal leaders to control prisons, territories, and smuggling routes as semi-autonomous fiefdoms. The regime ensured protection, and the gangs ensured loyalty. The word brand literally stands for preso rematado asesino neto, meaning a natural-born killer. These prisons became criminal headquarters guarded by a state where gangs like the Tren de Aragua ran international kidnapping and drug rings from behind bars, complete with luxury pools and nightclubs. Maduro himself carried a $15 million bounty from the US Department of Justice for narco-terrorism. But the 2026 rupture is internal. Tren del Llano, one of Venezuela's most powerful super gangs, broke the Preneto Pact. As economic collapse deepened, foreign intelligence agencies began outbidding the regime for loyalty. The criminal ecosystem that once sustained Venezuela began consuming it from within. The narco states stopped being stable, and unstable narco states do not survive in America's backyard. They say statecraft is about national interest, but in the matrix, we know it's often about something much more primitive. a personal vendetta. To understand why US Tomahawks are flying in 2026, you need to understand the collision of three men: Hugo Chavez, Rex Tillerson, and Marco Rubio. The roots of this war trace back to 2007 when Hugo Chavez nationalized Venezuela's oil industry. This was not regulatory reform, it was expropriation at gunpoint. Among the many companies stripped of assets, one was ExxonMobil. Its multi-billion-dollar Cerro Negro project was erased overnight. At the time, Exxon CEO was Rex Tillerson. Tillerson initiated a global legal campaign to freeze Venezuelan assets, choke financial access, and isolate Caracas from international markets. Years later, when Tillerson became US Secretary of State under Donald Trump, a corporate grievance was elevated into official American policy. But every vendetta needs an architect. That architect was Marco Rubio, the senior Florida senator and a child of Cuban exiles and the mastermind behind the Troika of Tyranny doctrine. He conceptualized Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua as a single hostile ecosystem. Not separate problems, but one ideological infection that had to be surgically removed. His mission is simple: purge. Purge the Russian military presence. Purge the Chinese financial leverage and restore the Western Hemisphere as an uncontested American sphere. And the final red line was not drawn in Caracas, but in neighboring Guyana. Recently, ExxonMobil, Tillerson's old empire, discovered a staggering 11 billion barrels of oil in Guyana's Essequibo region, which transformed the complete equation. When a desperate Maduro threatened to annex that territory, he did not just threaten a neighbor, he threatened Exxon's balance sheet. And in the Donroe Doctrine, you don't mess with American energy. The 2026 strike are the ultimate fusion of state power and corporate revenge. The ghost of Chavez finally met wall of Exxon. In recent years, the geopolitical consensus has been shifting. Countries demand multipolar approach, but in 2026, the US is sending a brutal message to the world. Globally, the world may be multipolar, but in the Americas, the US still demands a unipolar reality. And the victim of this reality? China. Beijing is currently facing its most expensive foreign policy setback. Venezuela was not just another trade partner, it was meant to be the anchor for China's Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America, a strategic beachhead right in the edge of the Caribbean. Between 2007 and 2017, China poured over $100 billion into the Maduro and Chavez regimes. This was checkbook diplomacy on a massive scale. But the results? Look at the Tianco-Anaco Railway. This was a $7.5 billion BRI dream, a high-speed train to modernize the nation. Today, the tracks are rusting and the stations are empty. But China's influence actually went deeper than steel and rail. They exported the digital authoritarian model. Using technology from the Chinese giant ZTE Corporation, Maduro developed the Fatherland Card, a surveillance tool that tracked who voted, who received food rations, and who remained loyal to the party. The timing of the 2026 strike was actually the ultimate American move. Reports indicate that just as before the first Tomahawks hit, a high-level Chinese delegation was in Caracas. They weren't there for peace, but to secure their assets, to protect $100 billion investment. The US ignored them. The Donroe Doctrine has exposed a chilling reality for Beijing. Economic leverage offers no protection against kinetic force. In the new jungle, China's billions couldn't buy a single minute of safety for their client state. The paper tiger was called out. In the world of the Matrix, one nation's chaos is another nation's golden ticket. For India, the fall of Caracas might not just be a headline, it can be a massive economic opportunity. You see, Venezuelan oil is not like light, easy crude from the Middle East. It is heavy sour, a thick, sludge-like substance that most refineries in the world simply cannot process. But this geopolitical trash is exactly what Indian refiners turn into gold. Reliance Jamnagar Refinery, Nayara Energy, Indian Oil Corporation, HPCL Mittal Energy and Mangalore Refinery possesses the highest complexity index on the planet. They are technological fortresses designed to handle the world's most difficult oil. If a US-backed government takes over in Venezuela, the sanctions will vanish. India can then buy this heavy crude at a massive discount, process it with unmatched efficiency and sell the finished products like premium diesel to Europe at a massive profit. In the industry, we call this complexity margin, and right now, India owns it. Finally, let's look at the empirical data for the global markets. In the short term, expect a fear premium. Oil prices could spike to $95 per barrel as the bombs fall. But look at the long-term horizon. Venezuela holds over 300 billion barrels of reserves, the largest on earth. Once that is fully reopened, we might see a massive crash towards $65 per barrel. And keep an eye on gold and silver. As the US enters this new phase of kinetic realism, when raw power replaces international law, central banks pivot to hard assets. We expect gold to test the $2,800 an ounce mark as the world hedges against a new era of American intervention. For New Delhi, the strategy is clear: strategic silence. While the West and the East clash over ideology, India is positioning its refineries and its state-owned giants to capitalize on the inevitable reopening of the Venezuelan oil tap. The fall of Caracas is a brutal reminder that in the modern world, sovereignty is not a right, but a function of power. Maduro's gamble attempting to build a multipolar fortress in the lion's den has failed, as Donroe Doctrine shattered the shield provided by Chinese billions and Russian bombers. While Washington reclaims its hemisphere, India's path remains one of strategic silence, navigating the diplomatic crossfire and positioning our refineries to capitalize on the inevitable reopening of the Venezuelan oil tap. The world is changing. The matrix is shifting. Are you watching the right data? This is Indian Matrix. Stay sharp, stay data-driven. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for our next deep dive deconstruction. We'll see you in the next one.